and welcome to another edition of Today with Dr. Wendy. Well, my co-host Larry Dersham and I have lots of news to talk about tonight. One of the biggest pieces of news that's on everybody's mind over the last week is the inauguration. I mean, that might as well have been a holiday. Everybody watched the inauguration, and it's just one of those days that is celebrated like none other. And there was pomp and circumstance. There was celebrity. There were prayers. I mean, there were a star-studded guest list. There was really a lot going on. What there wasn't was the usual thousands and thousands of people in the mall, obviously because of the security concerns. But before we go any further, I mean, Larry, we have to talk about the inauguration. I mean, what a difference a couple days have made. We are going to get to the flurry of executive actions and what that means in a minute. But I have to ask, what was your favorite part of the day? I mean, was it Lady Gaga? Was it J Lo? Was it the poet laureate? Was it the all-star cast that was in the stands? Was it Bernie Sanders' mittens? I mean, what did you take away from that day? So much to talk about.
Right. For me, Wendy, it was truthfully, for me, it was hard to watch because I was so disappointed in the results, but I can get over that quite easily. And I won't really go into this now, but I'm still so concerned about election integrity. And so that was so much on my mind. Truthfully, I was engaged in other activities, but I did pick up on the news items. And I thought about this and actually saw somebody mention this. The inauguration happened, of course, Wednesday, January 20th. But if you need 20 to 40,000 armed soldiers to protect your inauguration from the people, then you probably weren't elected by the people. And some people say it wasn't an election, it was a selection. But again, that's just my take on it, my opinion. And it is a beautiful ceremony for sure. And I just love the fact that we have a peaceful transition of power. It makes us unique as Americans.
It's true. And, one of the things that you and I like to do is sort of present both sides of the issue. And I think that we fairly do that with something like the inauguration. The troops were also there because of what happened, the horrific storming of the Capitol on January the 6th. And, the presence of the troops really made everybody feel pretty safe. It was one of those instances where, we call this sight hardening in the threat assessment arena. But they did an excellent job with sight hardening. They really did everything they could to make sure that they had the intelligence, they had the manpower, they did what they could to deter anything from occurring that day, even though it meant far less people in the stands. And in terms of the celebrity factor, I mentioned some of the performers, but how about Mike Pence? I watched the whole thing and he got an ovation when he showed up with his beautiful wife. They were delighted that he was there to see the peaceful transfer of power on the special day. And I also like that there were lots of prayers. I mean, you and I as Christians, Larry, you can't go wrong with prayer being incorporated into these ceremonies, can you?
Oh, not at all. Prayer is excellent. I wanted to briefly go back to January 6th, the day that there was a big rally for the president, and then there was that unfortunate event at the Capitol building. But I had somebody put it in perspective who was there with his whole family. And he also is a filmmaker, so he's quite that day. But he estimated his many rallies, many crowds. He said there were a minimum of 1 million people there. So if you contrast, let's say 400 people to the 1 million people, that means that 99.9996 of the people at the rally were well behaved.
That's right. Puts it into perspective, doesn't it, Larry?
It does.
The other thing that's come to light in the last couple of weeks, and this interests me as a prosecutor because when you're talking about what do you charge people with, intent is always something that factors into this type of an analysis. The intent of people that attend a rally in riot gear is pretty clear. And that appears, no doubt, to be what the different prosecutors, the state prosecutors, the federal prosecutors, that's what they're looking at. In other words, they're looking at people that didn't just get caught up in the heat of passion, but that attended that event with the intention to breach the Capitol. So those are some of the things in the mix. And, we're also seeing a lot of arrests. Right after the storming, people were complaining, why isn't everybody in custody? But as you and I both know as lawyers, investigation needs to be done, intelligence needs to be gathered, and sure enough, now we are seeing justice being done, arrests being made, and offenders being brought to justice.
Exactly, as it should be. And it's probably going to take some time to get it all figured out. But hopefully, the ones that were causing problems, the ones that were breaking windows, need to pay for that. They need to be
Yeah.
brought to justice. 100% agree.
We're shaking that out right now. But one of the other things that happened shortly after the inauguration, in fact, that same day, was a flurry of executive orders. Now, it's true, some of these are undoing some of what President Trump had put into place, but some of them are other types of orders that President Biden has been talking about for some time, that have been on his mind, that he's passionate about. And one of those has to do with masking. So we all saw the footage the night of the inauguration, and they were calling it, Joe Biden unmasked because, of course, he was caught on federal property without a mask shortly after having signed a mask mandate. And you can imagine why. I mean, he probably pulled it down to take a breath or something. I mean, those of us that go out know that those things are pretty darned uncomfortable. But the mask mandate is something worthy of discussing because we have seen these things be recommended and they're suggestions, but to have a mandate gives some teeth to the law. And as somebody that normally lives out of a suitcase because of my travel schedule, I couldn't help but notice and follow very closely the fact that a federal mask mandate will impact the way they can enforce the laws when you fly. I know you love to travel too, Larry. Have you been following this?
I have, but not to the detail you have. It is interesting. We have the mask mandate, and then I'm also a little bit concerned there's going to be a vaccination mandate. And I know a lot of
Yes.
people are still saying, they didn't really do any human testing on this, or very little if they did any. And I know that some people react to it in a negative way, the vaccination, allergic reaction. So I'm a little bit worried if they try to institute a requirement for vaccinations to fly, go to the store, and so forth.
Well, here's an interesting thing with that, Larry, because if you get vaccinated, do you still need to wear a mask? Can you still transfer COVID from here to there? So a couple interesting issues there. First of all, of course, is the wearing a mask on a plane. So comply or don't fly. Mask up before you go wheels up. Everybody knows that's going to be the new rule. However, can you also say no shoes, no shirt, no shot, no service? Can you still require a shot, the vaccine, to be part of that analysis? Why do you need to do both? So these are the kinds of questions people are asking because the number one issue, at least the number one pushback issue that I'm hearing with respect to the vaccine passport, as we're now discussing it, is it's not a passport, it's not paperwork, it's an app. At least that's the way it's being described. And if that's true, then how much more of my medical information is transmitted when I show you the app on my smartphone, on my tablet, however I relay this information? I mean, obviously, some of my medical information is going to be made, I don't want to say public, but it's going to be in a format that can be shared. And if that's true, Larry, who do the airlines share it with?
And then you hear about the major breaches of the large stores. I think Target had a huge breach several years
I
ago.
remember that.
Exactly. And then it gets out, and then it's out there. I mean, if you have your social security number, it could be used against us, I suppose, if it gets in the wrong hands. So that's always a concern.
Well,
Uh,
it's also concerning in terms of what the wrong hands and what does that get into. You know that these lists, you're always talking about lists. Is there going to be a no vaccination list? Because this hasn't been talked about a lot, but there is a no fly list of mask violators. And that is not, I mean, you don't hear people talk about it every day, but it's also not a secret. So apparently, there have been thousands of people that have already been banned from airlines like Delta, United, Frontier, Spirit, JetBlue, Alaska. I could go on and on because this is something that has already been instituted. This is something that's already been instituted. You don't hear about it a lot, obviously, because it's probably not very popular. But will there then be a list of people that don't want to take vaccines?
There could be, Wendy. Hey, but before we go to our first break, I have a list of my own, and it's a thank you list for President Trump. Of course, his last day was this past week. So, just really quickly, thank you, Mr. President Trump, for everything you've done. How does this sound, Wendy? I'm going to write him a note. It shouldn't be ending this way, but I and 79 million other Americans just want to thank you for all your effort on our behalf for the past years. Thank you for making us energy independent. Thanks for the tax cuts. Thanks for destroying ISIS. Thanks for the border wall. Thanks for calling out fake news. Thanks for the lowest unemployment rate for Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, Native Americans, and women in history of our nation. Thanks for making peace in the Middle East. And thank you for reining in the Chinese Communist Party in terms of the trade and stealing our intellectual property. And since I am short on time, thank you for Operation Warp Speed. There has never been a vaccination created in 9 months in the history of creation of vaccines.
That's for sure. That's for sure. You know, you're going to have to put it on the hood of his golf cart, Larry, to get it to him, because that apparently is where he's being spotted over in Mar-a-Lago. Stay with us, folks. We are going to have a very interesting guest on the other side of the break. We just celebrated Martin Luther King Day. He had a dream one day people would be judged by the content of character, not by the color of their skin. We are going to hear how far we have come towards reaching that goal. So don't touch that dial. We are back in a flash. Welcome back to Today with Dr. Wendy. I'm Wendy Patrick. So we talk about America being the land of opportunity, where if you have the determination, you can be whatever you want to be. It's truly the American dream. Well, we talk about that, and then we also occasionally have guests that know everything that that dream encompasses, who have lived it, who have studied it, who inspire us, who encourage us. And Larry, I understand we have one of those special guests on the line with us tonight.
We do, Wendy. I'd like to introduce to our audience Barbara from Harlem. Barbara grew up in New York City, where, as she says, Blacks were instructed to register as Democrats and were taught that the Democrats were for the poor and the Republicans were for the rich. However, later in life, she began to see huge inconsistencies in the Democrats' statements and their actual policies. And the final straw came for Barbara with the acquittal of O.J. Simpson back in 1994, when she heard horrific remarks from her associates about justification for his acquittal just because he was Black. Barbara from Harlem knew as a Christian she could no longer follow such logic, and she became a staunch conservative and has never looked back. And Barbara has recently come out with a new book titled Escaping the Racism of Low Expectations. Welcome to the program, Barbara.
So, Barbara, I understand that your conversion to conservatism, to personally experience the liberal teaching in higher education, you've had some very interesting experiences, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your that you actually graduated from a liberal arts college in New York City. But I understand you're actually in Harlem right now. Is that true? I have to ask you what the weather is like in Harlem. We are complaining like you wouldn't believe here in San Diego because there's a little bit of drizzle. What's it like in Harlem? Oh, oh, that sounds terrific. I would love to hear a little bit more about, how did this conversion experience come about? How did it evolve? How did it start? Amen. Oh,
Wow.
whoa. Whoa.
Oh, right.
Amen,
Amen.
sister.
I do.
Wow.
Wow. My goodness. Hey, Barbara, I've got a quick question. It's kind of a little aside for fun. Back in Harlem, is there something called the Apollo Theater? Yes. Okay. So when I was a young man, 12 years old, actually, learning to play drums, there was a guy named James Brown and his band, most amazing band in the world.
Oh.
I think I had his album called James Brown Plays the Apollo Theater. He had three drummers in his band. And I would, to pick up my drum grooves, I would listen to the LP over and over again, because back then you couldn't loop it as a digital file. You had to actually put the 12-inch LP on and listen to it. I learned all my drumming grooves from James Brown in that Apollo Theater album. So it's near and dear to my heart. But oh wow.
Oh, wow.
Oh wow. Hey, fantastic. Hey, Barbara, I got a question for you. How can we help minority groups escape this bondage of the Democratic Party and help them realize their great potential as free human beings created in the image of God? How do we do that? Good. Yes. Amen.
Mm.
That's
You know,
beautiful.
Barbara, I heard a lot about this on Inauguration Day. Larry and I were just talking about prayer and how we love prayer no matter where it takes place. You know, you talk about person to person. There are so many people that we can bond with, Democrats, Republicans of all colors, because of course we are the human race, as we always say. How can we use faith to really bring our two sides together? You know, we always like to say there's more that unites us than divides us, but isn't Jesus Christ one of the biggest things that unites us rather than divides us? Or maybe it should be? Terrific. For
Right.
life.
That's right. Mm.
Mm.
Oh, well, we need more people like you, Barbara. You're amazing.
Barbara,
My
how do people
goodness.
find out more about you? We're nearing the end of the show, but I want to give any of our listeners a little more opportunity to learn more about you. Do you have a website? I understand you have a radio show called Our Urban Story as well. It's so catchy. Barbara, that is so catchy. You know, Larry and I talk about a lot of political and religious issues on the show, and it is so refreshing to really be able to talk to somebody like you that actually has lived a very interesting path. You know, it's one thing to say, I've always been on one side. I've always been on one side, and I definitely, you know, look to the other. But you've actually experienced and evolved through so many different things that I just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And to our listeners, thank you very much for joining us. And we're so pleased we had such a fantastic guest tonight. Maybe Barbara will grace us again. She was just terrific. Thank you for all
Thank you,
your
Barbara.
inspiration. Yeah, definitely. You are listening to Today with Dr. Wendy. It has been our pleasure to join you, and we are wishing you a blessed week. And we will be back on the air same time next weekend. We will talk to you then.